You know the world of technology very well. You know what barriers we are up against in terms of the public mind. John has clearly demonstrated with his findings that we can tap into a market, but we know how challenging it is because of all the barriers that players with money, Dave's just pointed, the globalist mentality and the globalist access, you know, they perpetuate their own self-interest. How do we reach beyond the barriers that the globalists and the technology world folks who have a lot of money and a bigger voice than we, it feels like, how do we get past that?
Well, it really is a two-edged sword. And before I hit that, I would just like to say that when Kevin's talking about liberty, security, values, sometimes that's a positive thing. Let's find a company, you mentioned Smith & Wesson, that advances that. Sometimes it's just a matter of not investing in companies that use slave labor. Sometimes it's just a matter of not subsidizing the creation of a surveillance state and a social credit system that's being exported to the whole world. And that, of course, is your nexus with technology. Sure. We absolutely have to be mindful that this technology can work either direction. It is content neutral. So on the positive side, when we were building PayPal, we went from 0 to 25 million customers in 2.5 years before we sold to eBay. That's really cool. I can tell you what's really cooler is we enabled the creation of 2 million small businesses in that same 2.5 years. And that's just grown exponentially from there. Those are people with financial freedom. Those are people who are not a wage slave or an actual slave. Those are people who control the destiny of their own life, their family's life, their children's lives. This is liberty. This is our values. And yes, it is absolutely security. So that's the positive side of technology. The negative side, as you know, we are finding ourselves deplatformed and demonetized right and left by companies that have benefited tremendously from capitalism. And we have to be mindful. You know, Lenin was not wrong when he said that the capitalists would sell the communists the rope with which they would hang us. He is absolutely correct from the grave and from burning in hell. And you know, we're doing it right now. Why? Well, you've got all the reasons why. It's more that. And you have to understand that on a fundamental level, that is this. Big business people are not capitalists. Capitalism isn't the philosophy of big business. Mm-hmm. Capitalism is the philosophy of the little guy trying to get ahead. The poor kid from Arkansas who gets to go be part of creating something like PayPal. That's my philosophy because that's how I go from nothing to something. But when you are in power and you have a ton of money, what are you going to do with it? You're going to take that money and buy government as a club to beat your rivals and competitors into submission. And we have to understand, big business is not going to look at this from an ideological standpoint. They're going to look at it from a quarterly report standpoint. So we can talk about the problems at Twitter, we can talk about the problems at Google, we can talk about the antitrust issues, we can talk about the technical issues, we can talk about the degree to which they are cooperating with the creation of the Chinese communist surveillance state and the export of it here. But what you really have to talk about is the reality that these institutions function as a public square, whether the law recognizes that reality or not, that Section 230 is creating a perversity in this country that is squelching the First Amendment, and that the only way that we will ever rescue any concept of privacy, not just in this country, but in human civilization in a hyper-technologized age, is by exercising our rights as the sovereign people who have delegated certain enumerated powers to elected representatives to protect us, and that government does not need to constrict private property, but does need to regulate it in such fashion as to be consistent with the rights that are not given to us by the state or even by the Constitution, but by our Creator. And if we don't take that seriously, freedom will die in this generation.